Hello and welcome to Boring Dad Gaming, where today I'm going to be talking about my top 10 games of the year. Unlike last year's video, this time I've actually ranked the games on the list, but like last year, the footage you're seeing during this intro is from games I enjoyed, but didn't quite make the cut. Once again, I'll be exclusively talking about games I've both played and featured on the channel, and all of these were played on PC. So, with that said, sit back, relax, and let me tell you about my favourite games of 2023.
Who's there? Me. Huh?
Number 10. Shadow Gambit, The Cursed Crew. It's a little strange to start a top 10 games of the year list on a slightly bittersweet note, but that's where we find ourselves with Shadow Gambit, The Cursed Crew. The game itself is great, an atmospheric, occult, piratical take on the real-time tactics formula. The only somber note stems from the fact that it's developer Mimimi's final game. Each of their games has been a certified banger, from Shadow Tactics' Blade of the Shogun's World of Feudal Japan, to them then picking up the Desperado's torch to round out the trilogy with arguably the best title in the series. But Shadow Gambit is the studio at the peak of its powers, drawing on everything they learned previously and applying a real sense of swagger to proceedings, bringing to the mix a memorable roster of characters and utilising the supernatural setting to its fullest with a fun and outrageous selection of powers and abilities. It's a tragedy the game didn't seem to find a bigger audience, the genre itself perhaps ultimately being too niche for broad appeal. But there's every chance Shadow Gambit and its predecessors will be remembered as the classics of the tactic genre they deserve to be. Number 9. Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader. The latest entry on this list, Rogue Trader, only released less than a month ago, and given its enormous size, I'm still a long way from completing it. But its quality meant that it had to be included. I'm a big fan of developer Alcat's previous games, both set in the Pathfinder universe. Had I had this channel back when Wrath of the Righteous released back in 2021, it would have been my top game of that year. Rogue Trader, though, is their first foray into the Warhammer 40k universe, and while it perhaps didn't draw me in initially as quickly as Wrath did, I wonder if some of that may be down to my lack of familiarity with the lore and setting. More and more I find that it's the game I find hardest to tear myself away from and can't wait to get back to playing. It's perhaps initially off-putting, particularly for those new to the CRPG genre, due to the sheer complexity of some of its systems, and Alcat has unapologetically filled the list of skills and abilities with lines of sums and equations I haven't seen since my A-level maths exam. But taking the time to learn and familiarise yourself with it is rewarding. As the hours have gone on, I found myself enjoying it more and more, soaking up the lore and having fun experimenting with the different classes and builds. I can see the complexity causing some players to perhaps bounce off it, but for my money it's worth persevering and pushing through that barrier in order to experience one of the deepest RPGs of the year.
You're on a path in the woods, and at the end of that path is a cabin. And in the basement of that cabin is a princess.
Number 8. Slay the Princess. I went into Slay the Princess not really knowing what to expect, and after I'd played it, I was questioning exactly what I'd just experienced. It's definitely a unique game that sees you facing off against the titular princess, the nature of whom changes depending on your encounters with her, and a mysterious narrator that may, or may not, be entirely on your side. Not since the Stanley Parable have I played a game where a significant part of the enjoyment comes from exploring as many different avenues as possible, perhaps starting with defying the increasingly exasperated narrator and branching off into strange and bizarre tangents. It's possible to, quote, beat the game in a matter of minutes, but really you'll be playing and replaying it numerous times to try and see all the different routes and endings, before reaching an ultimate conclusion that throws some light onto everything you've experienced along the way. I may never play anything like Slay the Princess again, but I'm glad I got to do so, at least once.
As we gear up for another bloody installment of everyone's favorite reality survival show.
Number 7. Showgunners. The XCOM remake may not have invented the turn-based tactics genre, but it certainly popularised it for a modern audience, with a plethora of new titles that draw inspiration from it and its sequel releasing each year. And there were a couple of others that narrowly missed out on this list. For me, Shogunners is one of the better examples of the genre, blending the turn-based combat with semi-open world real-time exploration, and a dystopian game show setting reminiscent of The Running Man, it worked really well, seeing your main character Scarlet traversing the show's studio and kind of backstage areas before entering a mission area. These are bespoke, handcrafted turn-based maps positioned as episodes of the show, and often have unique twists on the formula. Along the way, you gather a squad of teammates, each with an array of unique skills and abilities. The final levels in particular stood out for me, where you're able to take your entire roster into battle rather than having to pick only a few favourites, getting to unleash your full arsenal onto waves of enemies with often spectacular results. It's a game I haven't really heard being talked about, and it would be a shame if it were one that had fallen between the cracks this year. I can heartily recommend it to fans of the genre, and I would happily play any future sequels. Number 6, The Pale Beyond. This is definitely a pick close to my heart, as I had so much fun doing the playthrough on my channel and putting on different voices for the characters. A not unchallenging task given how many there are, and results may have been mixed in places. But regardless of my patchy voice acting abilities, it was a game I thoroughly enjoyed. I'd recently watched the miniseries The Terror, a semi-fictionalized account of a 19th century lost Arctic expedition, which this resembled in many ways. It's a fascinating story of a crew's struggle against the inhospitable conditions adrift in a frozen waste, hunger, internal strife, and ultimately paranormal elements. As the eventual leader of the expedition, it falls upon you to make decisions that affect the lives of dozens of others, and choosing poorly can and will have fatal consequences. One decision in particular stayed with me for a long time afterwards. Sometimes there are no right decisions, with you having to try to decide which is the least bad option. I won't spoil the final revelations, which offer a clever, in-universe way of revisiting previous decisions. But I will close by saying that if you play one narrative adventure from 2023, it should be The Pale Beyond.
This, Trevor, is your life. A life that has been recorded and compiled right down to the last second. We'll get you out of here, I promise. Shit!
Number 5, American Arcadia. The second game in this list to draw inspiration from a classic movie, American Arcadia pays homage to The Truman Show. Initially playing as Trevor, an unwitting participant in a long-running reality TV show that spies on the lives of everyday people living inside a dome, you also take on the role of the inside operator, helping him to understand the nature of his existence and, ultimately, to try to break free. Other games have asked you to play dual roles, but here, doing so brings an interesting and welcome change to the gameplay. As Trevor, you run through a 2D platforming and puzzling zone, similar to Inside or Limbo. But when you play as Angela, the action switches to first person and 3D environments. It's a credit to the developers that this doesn't feel jarring, and in fact helps the game feel fresh and varied until the end, when other games opting for just one of those styles may have outstayed its welcome. The story may not break new ground, but it's interesting to see it played out with a few twists along the way. There's a fun sense of humour throughout, the controls feel good and responsive, and it includes an original song that you'll be humming long after the credits have rolled. What more could you want? Number 4, Dredge. Anyone who's followed my channel in the past year would know this would be on the list somewhere, and I would hate to disappoint. Like other games both on this list and last year's, Dredge is a standout example of why I love indie games. It's simply not a title that would be made by a big studio, a game where you play as a fishing trawler sailing around a chain of down-on-their-luck islands, spending most of the time either traversing the rolling waves or playing one of the fishing mini-games. If that were all, it would be a diverting little game, but little else. But the addition of Lovecraftian elements and a gradually unfolding tale of eldritch corruption, madness, and lost love adds a whole new dimension. For the most part, it's subtly done, starting with landing some bizarre, oftentimes grotesque fish. Before long, though, you're fleeing from unholy marine terrors and all too real hallucinations, and staying out too late leaves you fighting to retain your sanity. The only reason it isn't higher on my list is just because of the outstanding quality of those still to come. Number 3, War Tales. Another game that longer-term viewers on the channel would have been expecting to see. And it's no surprise, really. I spent around 100 hours playing the base game alone, before the recent DLC expansion, Pirates of Balerion, that added a whole new gameplay element and massive new map to explore. It feels, in some ways, like a game made for me specifically. You know, managing a troop of mercenaries as they explore a continent, taking on contracts to earn the coin to buy food and gradually improve their equipment, turn-based battles and a wide range of different classes and abilities. It's like a gaming Venn diagram with me slap bang in the centre. It bears some similarities with an earlier game, Battle Brothers, which I also played for hundreds of hours. And while I wouldn't necessarily claim that War Tales improves on that, I do feel like the more realistic 3D world and character models adds a new dimension for me. Pun not intended. I don't think it's a perfect game, and I have some niggles here and there. For instance, there are so many battles and late games, so many combatants involved, that they take such a long time to resolve. But it's without doubt one of my top gaming highlights of the year. Number 2. Dave the Diver. There aren't many games that surprise me. There are even fewer that keep me surprised throughout almost their entire playtime. Dave the Diver is a simple enough premise. You play as the titular character and spend the daytime diving to catch fish that you then serve at night in your sushi restaurant. Many other games would probably leave it at that. But Dave the Diver continually adds new things almost every in-game day, until by the end you're partaking in a mind-boggling array of tasks. As well as diving and running the restaurant, you'll be growing ingredients on a farm, populating and managing a fish farm, staffing and running a satellite branch, exploring ancient ruins, building up a massive arsenal of weapons, helping merfolk, seahorse racing, growing seaweed, gambling, and that's just the stuff I can remember off the top of my head nearly 6 months later. The devs even teamed up with the makers of my number 4 game for a Dredge-themed DLC, which I've yet to play. It's fun, it's colourful, it's funny, it's packed full of different mini-games and enough variety to keep you fully engaged throughout its 30-plus hour playtime. And that's if you're rushing through the story, which the game never forces you to do. Did I mention the boss fights? In terms of pure fun factor, this is probably the standout game of the year for me.
I saved you. And I'm here to save you again.
Number 1. Baldur's Gate 3. I mean, it had to be, didn't it? Even if I wasn't a massive fan of RPGs in general, and the previous Baldur's Gate games in particular, Baldur's Gate 3 is such a stunning achievement in gaming that it feels like it's going to have a massive impact on the future of the genre as a whole. Just as The Witcher 3 did in 2015, Baldur's Gate 3 served to completely raise the bar in terms of storytelling, world building, immersion, and action. In both games, there's no such thing as a fetch quest or padding. Everything that's included has a weight to it, a sense that you're not just farming for XP in a shiny new character level, but becoming involved in the lives of the people inhabiting this world, so many of whom are more fleshed out than you'd expect of characters many players might not even encounter. And there's both meaning and repercussions to your actions. You can easily miss out on central party characters even, particularly when playing a particular origin character, and the game continues without missing a step. There are no Skyrim-style unkillable NPCs here, who'll stand up again moments after you've beaten them unconscious with an enchanted mace. And for those you do keep around, you have a huge influence on the outcome of their personal stories. A second playthrough is basically essential to try and see as many different story resolutions as possible, and even then, you're sure to be missing out on a whole lot more. Quite honestly, I can't praise this game enough, and I'm so pleased to see that unlike other games on this list, it garnered mainstream attention and acclaim. Honestly, Larian deserves it, and I can't wait to see what they do next. For me, Baldur's Gate 3 isn't simply the best game of 2023. There's a strong argument to be made for it being perhaps the best game I've ever played. And there we go. Those were my 10 top games of 2023. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, if you could hit the thumbs up button, that'd be great. Leave me a comment. Let me know both what you thought about my list, the games on this list, if you've played them, and your own personal favourites that perhaps I've not included. Let me know. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you're watching this, it'd be absolutely wonderful if you could do that as well. So I'm just going to say thanks very much to everyone who's followed Boring Dad Gaming over the past year. It really means so much to me that the channel continues to grow, and lots of people talking about the games I'm playing. I love getting involved in the discussions as well. And there's plenty more to come in 2024. There's some really good-looking games out there that I'm very much looking forward to playing. And I hope that you'll, come into the channel on occasion and watch some of those games along with me. So thanks very much, and I hope to see you guys in 2024. Bye for now.